Welcome, heroes and villains, to the Duke Enterprises YouTube channel. Take a moment to relax from your conflicts, and we're going to answer a question that I've had for ever since I interviewed Ronnie on on him being a game master, and that is, what is Falkenstein?
Oh, hi. Yes, what is Castle Falkenstein? I will show you the rulebook. For a starter, that's the main rulebook. Castle Falkenstein is published by Artalzorian Games, the people behind Cyberpunk. And it is Victorian steampunk fantasy.
If it's published by the same people that do Cyberpunk, what's the difference between it and Cyberpunk then?
Well, the rule system is completely different. Although in one of the supplements for Castle Falkenstein, they did provide conversion notes, just in case you wanted to take your steampunk characters and put them into a cyberpunk world, which in a way would have given you something close to Shadowrun. But mostly it's the setting. The setting is 19th century Europe. It's Victorian society, but it's a Victorian society that has dragons and magic, and the Fae, who are Falkenstein's version of sort of classic fantasy elves. There are dwarves. All the people who actually lived in Victorian times exist. All the fictional characters set in Victorian times exist as well. So you do have that odd thing where both Sir Arthur Conan Doyle exists and Sherlock Holmes. They're both real people. Arthur Conan Doyle's just a physician, and Sherlock Holmes is a burgeoning consulting detective with his friend and chronicler John Watson. So it's a lovely mix of the reality of the Victorian age and the sort of romantic view that we often take on it. And obviously it's steampunk as well, so there's lots of steam engines and clockwork gadgets and so on. It's just a gorgeous setting.
So would that mean that Dracula and Frankenstein would also exist?
Yes. Victor Frankenstein exists, as does his various creations. The famous creature, Baron. Count Dracula also exists as well. The stats are there for him, in case you want to inject a little gothic horror into your games, which I think is the other thing that I like about it is, whilst I run the game very much with a sort of light swashbuckling sort of feel to it, I'm very much influenced by things like the Musketeers and Prisoner Zender and the Assassination Bureau and to a large extent Princess Bride as well. You could run it as a straight-on gothic horror if you wanted to. You could do a sort of exploration science fiction using the works of H.G. Wells, for example, because I do have the stats for the Martian Walkers, so you could have War of the Worlds if you wanted to.
You are clearly very passionate about this setting.
It is. When I bought it back in the mid-90s, I bought it on a punt. I thought the cover looked interesting, so I bought it. I got it home, and as I often do when I get a new game, I sit down with a pad of paper and I create a character. And by creating a character, I learn the rules through that. In that first, when I got home that day, I sat down with a pen and paper. I think I created about 6 different characters, and I had a small adventure written by that same day. It just hit me. It just got me. I was immediately enthused by it and have remained very much so ever since.
As someone who has owned the rules for over 30 years, you're probably very familiar with them.
Yeah, I'm getting close to 30 years with the rules. Yeah, it's at least a good 25.
Which means you're probably also aware of the negatives of that you're probably aware of the negatives that this setting has to offer.
Yes. I mean, if you're someone who is not enthused by the idea of sort of Victorian steampunk, then it's not going to be for you. Also, magic is not the sort of classic fantasy quick cast system. With magic, you have to build up your sort of magical energy, what they call thaumaturgical energy. You have to build it up in order to cast it. So casting can happen, but it's not quick. The counter to that is that all the spells, apart from cantrips, which are just quick things like that, all the spells are scalable. You can take a small flame and basically burn a whole city with it if you wanted to. You just have to put more energy into it. It just takes longer to cast.
One of the 2 people at Pair of Geeks has a question for you, Ronnie. Castle Falkenstein or Shinta?
If you were to ask me what my favorite sort of setting for classic fantasy, that sort of D&D-esque, Pathfinder-esque sort of classic Tolkien-style fantasy, Shintar hits it. Which is, for those who don't know, Shintar is a campaign setting for the Savage Worlds role system. But Castle Falkenstein has been my number 1 game for the last 25 odd years and remains so by some considerable distance. So Falkenstein all the way for me. The only downside I've had is because of the specific mechanics it uses, I have found it next to impossible to run it online.
Would you like to go over those mechanics?
Right. Yeah. This is where we get into it. Essentially, what the other thing that sort of brings Falkenstein away from other systems is it doesn't use dice. It uses a regular pack of playing cards for task resolution. Essentially, all your stats. You don't really have stats. You just have attributes, which are just stats and skills. Are broken down under sort of 4 general headings, all controlled by a suit. So social and status related activities are controlled by spades. Physical activities are controlled by clubs. Hearts controls emotional and romantic, and diamonds is mental and intellectual. And as a character, as a player, you have a hand of 4 cards. It's your hand of fate. And you can play cards to add to your skill level. When you play a card, if it's the same suit as the skill that you're using, you get to use the entire value of that card. And if it's not, you don't. You get it as 1 point, regardless of the face value. What it means is if you're going to hit someone, if you play a club, then you get the entire value of that card added onto your skill. If you play any other suit, regardless of its face value, it just adds 1 point onto your skill. It's a beautifully elegant, simple system. It just works. I've had people who have never played anything like it before, and within half an hour they've got it. They don't think twice. They're just playing cards and they've got it, and they're enjoying it.
So, if you don't have dice, how does character creation work?
Character creation is essentially point based, which I have found to be far more fun. There is an argument that people enjoy rolling statistics because there is the chance of getting a whole bunch of very high results. It's very rare, but you could walk out with a character, say in D&D 5th, where you have stats where everything's like 15 plus. It's rare, but it happens. Whereas point buy does allow a little bit of balance. You can have a really high stat, but something's getting tossed away somewhere. With Falkenstein, you start with 6 skills. You get 6 skills at a level of great, 1 skill at a level of good, and 1 skill at a level of poor. The skills run from poor to average, good, great, exceptional, and extraordinary, and astounding, which goes into the expansion. And they all have they all have numerical values to them. A poor gives you 2 points, average is 4. And once you pick those skills, you can add other skills on, or you can raise skills that you've got, but you have to take other skills at poor to balance it off. You've got to pay the cost by taking other skills at a poor level, because any skill that you don't take defaults to average. It's just assumes you've got them. You don't even have to write them down, which means that your character sheet is actually, well, I'll come back to the character sheet in a minute, but your character sheet can actually be very short because you don't have to make mention of any skill that's average. You just assume to have it at average unless you... So basically, all you're putting down your character sheet are those things that are above and below average, which keeps things nice and pat. But the fun thing about the character sheet is I came up with a very shorthand version because there's no actual printed character sheet for Falkenstein. And the reason for that is the actual character sheet is a journal that you're meant to keep. You put it in the form of a diary, an ongoing story of all your adventures and everything that you learn. The idea being that if your character dies or when your character retires, you have their whole life as a novel. You've written their whole life as an ongoing story as your character sheet, which I think is wonderful. And it means that people are looking at their character in terms of the story, these great tales that we're telling.
It can't be just the cards that make running Falkenstein online hard, because doesn't After Forever After also use cards?
Yes, it does. And Becky had to design her very own system in order to run After Forever After. She did some years ago try and write me a similar system for Falkenstein, and it worked really great, but it's kind of sadly sort of fallen away because I never got a chance to use it. And I unfortunately am nowhere near savvy enough to sort of write code the way that Becky can, or I would attempt it. I mean, there are things like Roll20 that allow you to use cards. My friends and I are considering using Tabletop Simulator that will allow you to use a deck of cards, and using those and seeing we can run it with that. But I desperately would love to run a game online, because I sing its praises often enough, and at some point I've got to be able to put my money where my mouth is.
Could you go over the skills and how and those suits that are related to a bit more in depth?
I mean, the nice thing about it, I mean, I can repeat it, but the nice thing about it is, because it's very light. For example, I'll give you a couple of examples. Marksmanship. You're about to fire a rifle. That's considered a physical activity. So that would be covered by clubs. So in your hand of 4, if you have any clubs in your hand, when you shoot that rifle, you would play those club cards, and you would add the full, say you have a 6 of clubs and a 3 of clubs. You would play those cards, and that would add 9 onto your skill. And obviously you want as high as you want. You want as high as you can. If you want to try and romance someone, a bit of seduction, that would be an emotional skill. So that would be covered by hearts, funnily enough. It kind of fits. So again, if you were trying to seduce someone, and you had, say, a king of hearts, a king will give you 13 points onto your skill. They're nice to have. Aces are high in Falkenstein. They give you 14 points. And jokers, jokers are wild cards, and in your hand they give you 15 points to any suit.
How and when do the cards in player's hand replenish?
When they run out of cards completely. Only when they've played all 4 of their cards. And there used to be this terrible thing that I used to find some players do, which was card burning, where they would say they knew they were about to go into a combat, and they're sitting there and they've got a hand of hearts and a hand of diamonds. You know, they get hearts and diamonds and spades. They have no clubs in their hand. They would suddenly find themselves looking at a picture and trying to determine the age of the picture in a desperate attempt to burn all their cards in the hope of getting new cards in that might include some clubs, because they were about to do the combat, which I really despise. But Fat Goblin Games have been doing some third-party stuff for Castle Falkenstein over the last few years, and they brought out a small book called Variations to the Great Game. And one of the variations was you were only allowed to play a certain number of cards depending on your skill level, which I adopted straight away, and it stops card burning dead. Essentially, the worse you are at a skill, the less cards you can play to add to it.
So that brings up a question I had. What's to stop someone from is there any, if you build your character to be very good at the romance stuff, and you get and you keep getting no hearts, is there any way to compensate for that?
Yes and no. One is the fact that if you do have a character that's great at romance, Their skill should hopefully be enough on its own. Cards are a nice bonus, but hopefully the skill is enough anyway. If not, one of the other variations that came in, which I've also adopted, is what they call the half off, which is if you play a card, in your example, a heart, they need hearts. If they play a card that's the same color, in this case a diamond, they would get half that card's value. So they're trying to do a heart skill. They've only got a diamond. They've got an 8 of diamonds. That gives them another 4 points. That I've found to be very, very useful. And it kind of helps mitigate that problem that you raised about not having the right cards at the right time. But unfortunately, that's one of the downers. The more fun comes from the sorcery, because that has its own separate deck. It's still a pack of playing cards, but it's its own separate deck, because things change wonderfully then.
Do you have to choose which deck you draw from, the sorcery or the other deck?
No. Sorcery cards only come into play when you're about to cast a spell, and they're kept in their own deck. I even have my own separate deck for that. I got this satchel as a Christmas present a few years ago from my friend Samantha, and I use it to carry all my cards for Falkenstien because it just seemed to fit. So I have in here, I have 2 decks of fantasy steampunk cards, which I use for the players' skill decks. That's an example of some of the artwork. And I use that for the skill decks. And then, as I make an incredible racket, my friend David got me a deck of cards based on Narnia. And I use this as my sorcery deck because the cards in here are not only lovely, they also have a slight gold embossed edge on them, which give them a nice sheen to them, and they look suitably different. And I use them as my sorcery deck. The major difference is obviously sorcery is broken down into 4 different skills, again each controlled by a suit. The main difference with sorcery is that instead of playing cards all at once, you're pulling a card from the deck every 2 minutes. Now, if it's a card of the suit that you need, you can lay it down in front of you and you add that to the spell. If it's not, you can choose to ignore it. It just means it's going to take you even longer to cast a spell. Or you can use it, but it causes what's called a harmonic. The spell will cast, but it'll mutate slightly. It won't be pure. The only other thing is that jokers are great for skills. Jokers are bad for sorcery. A joker means that your spell wildfires. It just goes off, and it goes off at extreme, in an extreme form, with the wonderful line, the actual how powerful it is based on the GM's discretion. So depending on how funny I think it might be, or mean, or how well I think it will fit the story will affect how the spell works. For example, I ran a game where everyone was in a small. They were in a small village south of Warsaw in Poland, and they were hoping to get to Warsaw. They needed to get to Warsaw to stop a necromancer. And one of the characters, who was a mage, decided he was going to cast a teleportation spell. And he cast it, but he pulled a joker. So I decided that not only did he teleport himself and the rest of the group to Warsaw, he transported the whole village, buildings and all, right into the center of Warsaw, and just caused mass destruction in the middle of Warsaw, which was fun.
So you've had the Falkenstein rules for 25 odd years now.
Yeah.
How do you go about convincing new players to play Falkenstein over other games? That's my penultimate question.
In all honesty, I've let them see the rulebook. Once they take a look at the rulebook, once they see some of the artwork, in fact, there's a particular. Let's see if I can find it very quickly. There's a particular picture that tends to get the point across very, very quickly. And this is where I can't flip and find it. This is where he can't find it, and I am doing this live. There it is. There it is. This picture, more than anything, sells Falkenstein to most people. Just a picture of a Victorian street. There's the odd steampunk, sort of steam engine, sort of mobile. There's a dragon having a nice conversation. There's an airship in the sky. They see that, and they see the simplicity of the system, and it doesn't take them long to make characters. Because they see the potential.
I like to end my interviews with this question, as I ended my last interview with you with this question. Is there anything or anyone you would like to shout out at this time?
There's a few people. First of all the people on Parageeks. Not just Becky and Jason, but Phil and Giorgio as well, because we have a ball on there on a Monday and a Saturday. Whether it's after Forever After, whether it's Call of Cthulhu, which we're playing at the moment, and all the other games that I've played in or ran, we just have a ball. I've got a group that I've run, not online, well, online but not recorded, that I play, that I run on a Thursday. I'm running Shinetar, funnily enough. I'm running Shinetar on a Thursday, and those guys have a ball. And we're I just I've met so many nice people through this hobby, and the guys on the Thursday game that I've got are friends that I've known for 35 years and then some, and we're a tight knit unit.
I'd like to thank those that watch this video live and those that are watching it after it's going to be uploaded. Don't forget to do all the YouTube things. Check out Pair of Geeks. And until we clash again, may your schemes and evokes be plentiful.
See you later.